Thank you. Good afternoon. I would like to reconvene meeting of the Columbus Education Commission, and this is not referenced in our agenda, but I wanted to bring you up to date with regard to the Early Childhood Working Group. And I would like to share with you that it's been meeting and reviewing the recommendations of the Columbus City Schools pre-kindergarten expansion proposal, along with elements of the former Early Learning Initiative program and the governor's proposed education budget. So those things are underway. We've identified quality, access, affordability, parent engagement, and increased readiness for kindergarten as priorities. We realize the importance of targeting services to our neediest children. We are working to bring recommendations back to the full commission early next month. Thank you. Okay, and then now I would like to turn the meeting over to Mr. Fingerhut.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's my great pleasure to introduce to the Commission Jim Mahoney. Jim has a formal and impressive bio, which you have and can review. I do want to highlight for you that in his 35 years of experience as a superintendent, as an assistant superintendent, principal teacher, and adjunct professor at several universities, that Jim has received numerous honors. I mentioned, Jim, before you were here this morning, that we have national leaders and national experts that we fly in from around the country to speak to us, but we have in you a national expert right here in Columbus. You get flown in everywhere else to talk and to help educate, and we are very, very lucky that you are right here in our community. Jim's been the executive director of Battelle for Kids since 2001. He's among the awards he's received: the Voinovich School Leadership and Public Innovation Award, the Ohio Friend of Education Award from the Ohio Federation of Teachers, the President's Award from the Ohio School Boards Association, the Ohio Superintendent Outstanding Performance Award, the Educator of the Year Award. It goes on and on. Gives you a sense of what Jim Mahoney's all about. What I'd like to say very simply is that we all know that we live in a time when the conversation about the quality of teachers, how to measure the quality of teachers is critical. How do we ensure that we have quality teachers? And it may seem like this issue has sprung into our consciousness and that all of a sudden people are trying to figure out how to address it. But there were a few people in this country, and Jim Mahoney is a leader of that, who knew that this issue was on the horizon a decade ago, and who built the expertise, the data, and the information necessary to help lead the country through this moment. So like any other piece of hard work, if it seems like all of a sudden he came out of nowhere and he's the national expert, it's not because it came out of nowhere. It's because for a decade he's been doing the work necessary that brought him to be the right person at the right time at this moment in this country on teacher education and evaluation. So we're very, very fortunate, Jim, that you've agreed to share some thoughts with us. Jim's going to speak to us for a little while, and then he's going to also moderate our panel of teachers. So he'll introduce the teacher panel, and I'll turn it over to Jim Mahoney.
Okay, thank you very, very much. My task after lunch is to make sure that you don't fall asleep. I want to thank Eric very, very much, and I want to say this: as a former superintendent, educating everyone takes everyone. And I certainly want to congratulate the mayor and the school board and all of the stakeholders who have a vested interest. Columbus kids may represent 25% or so of the population, but they represent 100% of the future. So together, the things that we do to assimilate the best ideas to prepare that road for them is absolutely critical. So I really want to congratulate the business community and all the things that you're doing to put this together. I want to start with 3 quotes, 2 illustrations, and 1 video clip. Now, the first quote is this. These are 3 of my favorites. Is this one: if you dance with a bear, you can't quit when you're tired. school reform is a bear. And to believe that there's a magic bullet or magic bullets, and if you do that, we'll get better, it just simply doesn't work. There are lots of pieces to this. And when you fix one, another one unfolds. So that you are constantly working on this in a way that matters. It just is very, very difficult. The second one is this. There's a belief, and I know that Tom Vander Ark and others have been here, but there's lots of evidence to suggest this. School is becoming less of a place and more about what is taking place. When I see lots of ways of organizing learning experiences for kids digitally, you begin to have a complete different sense of how school is in the future, because it's about learning. And learning is no longer going to be confined to a building and 9 to 3 and 180 days in between September and May, but it is going to be what is taking place. And we have the opportunity to create lots of different things and arrangements to promote the learning of young people, to prepare them for a world that's vastly different. I've been privileged to be in Hong Kong numerous times, and one of the times I was there, I was meeting with a group of kindergarten students, and I passed out bookmarks that a teacher had given me. And as I passed them out, this little kindergartner said to me, "Would you like for me to make a bookmark that you could take back and give to a student in America?" I said, "Yeah, that would be great." And then she looked at me and she said, "Do you want it in English or Chinese?" And it was a quick reminder to me that clearly we're not the largest English-speaking country, and nor is China. India is. But they're absolutely moving in that direction, and you begin to get a sense that not only the competition is no longer across the county or across the state, we are now absolutely in a global community, and you see that played out. My third quote is this: "The grass isn't greener on the other side. The grass is greener where you water it." So if you water collaboration, you get more ideas. If you water innovation, you get more ideas. If you water direction, you get improvement. If you water development, you get improvement. So whatever it is you water is what you get. And you can do anything. You cannot do everything. Now, my two illustrations are this. Here's the first one. All right. Now, I'm going to tell a little story, but I think this is exactly what's going on. Here's the bet that's being carried out across this country. I'm going to start first with Common Core standards. What does the kids need to know and be able to do? Because we've moved to a new Common Core set of standards in 46 states. So we're no longer trying to figure out, well, are Mississippi standards higher than Ohio's, and Ohio's is higher than Michigan, etc. But a set of Common Core. 46 states have voluntarily agreed to use these Common Core. The second piece in this is having a competent, caring, professional, nurturing teacher in every classroom. Because we can have the greatest standards in the world, but if we don't have someone who knows how to teach those in ways that are compelling and engaging to kids so they learn it, it won't matter. Third part of this drama that's taking place, I'm trying to make these the same, is assessment. How will we know kids know what we want them to know and can do what we want them to do if we don't assess it? So we need to assess it in ways that make sense. And the last one is accountability. Who's responsible for kids learning or not learning? Who do we hold accountable? Now, the bet that's being made across this country is if we have common standards, we have highly effective teachers, we assess in ways that make sense, and we hold people accountable, more kids will learn. And in the late 1990s and the early part of the 2000s, that was true. Now, this isn't exactly the way it's working, though. The idea of taking common standards and passing them on to teachers and say, here's the new book, here's what you ought to teach, is not sufficient. Because you now have these that are much more rigorous. They're taught earlier. There needs to be far greater application of these. They need curriculum to support what these new standards are. Giving a teacher a new book says, here are the new standards, go teach this, is insufficient. Now let's take teachers. At this stage, the idea It has morphed a long way since the day when I began as a teacher, when somebody gave me a red and blue pencil, red on one side, blue on the other, a package of chalk, a lesson plan book, and said, go get them. What has happened now? Now we have the expectations of teachers that you're going to use technology. You're going to do blended learning. You're also going to make sure that our lowest learners make progress and our highest learners make progress. We want you to use these Common Core standards. In addition, there's a whole set of expectations. And carried out in the classroom, a reminder of, we have these 4 students who require this particular medication at a time. These 3 kids can only go home with this parent. I'm just painting a picture. This is all real. It's just very, very difficult. So the idea that we're just going to plop a highly effective teacher in there and they should be able to carry out the common standards is about like this. Now let's go to assessment. We give end-of-year assessments. And in this country, we're going to move to an online assessment in a year from now. So there will be all of the digital challenges with that, but we're going to give an end-of-course, end-of-year in subject area assessments online. So now we can compare states. And then the last one is accountability. For some, accountability is who are we going to blame? There's this old notion that the beatings will continue until morale improves. So when we look at accountability as blame, we get something different. Now, it can look like this. It doesn't have to look like this. Now, I'm going to start with Common Core. Common Core makes sense. We ought to expect rigor for our kids. But at the same time, we're expecting that our kids to learn more, deeper understandings, problem solving, creativity, all of those things. We also have to support teachers. What's support look like? Because they've got to deconstruct these standards. They're at different grade levels. What's the curriculum that's going to support that? I need help in terms of, other than somebody handing me a book, I need time to collaborate with other people. Because if I'm going to do this well, I need to put together resources. It's absolutely critical because you cannot do this without teachers. And we're going to talk about highly effective teachers. The assessments, we're going to give an end-of-course assessment, but those aren't the assessments that really matter. It's the day-to-day assessments I make as a teacher. It's setting learning targets, seeing how kids are progressing. It's not waiting until I get the autopsy at the end of the year, 3 months into the next year. I've got to know how it is I do those things along the way that changes my instruction. And then last is accountability. How do we make accountability ownership? Because if you own something, no one has to talk to you about accountability because these are my kids. These are our kids. It is we, us, that we have a vested interest. And we want an accountability system that gives us a real look at how we're doing, but it creates such a sense of ownership about our kids that we want to do something different and better because they deserve that. Those are the things we need to do. Now, we take those 4 areas, and now we add policies and common sense approaches to all this to get what we most need in those 4 areas is alignment. That's the alignment we need. So we have Common Core, effective teaching, effective assessment, and effective ownership of all of our kids. That's the challenge. Now, like most things, it's easy to describe. It's hard to do. Now, the second illustration won't work very well because the way you're sitting, but you can try this at home because it does work. Just for a minute, underneath the table, I want you to take your right foot, and I want you to get your right foot going in a clockwise direction. If you would just indulge me and do that. Then I want you to take your index finger on your right hand and put it up in the air. Keep your foot going. Now, I want you to draw a 6. Most of you are not drawing a 6. You get the idea. My point of this illustration is we need coherence. It isn't, I just airlift this piece, throw this piece in, that one. We need coherence as we think about the big plan as to how we make this work. Now, here is the video clip I want to show. It really comes from a conference last June where we honored 83 teachers because I want to begin with how we define what makes a great teacher and how we might best utilize these resources. Okay, Matt, I'm going to...
One, we looked at
Hit it again. Celebrate Teaching is about honoring, educating, and respecting the profession that frankly made all others possible.
All of you receiving the award today are simply remarkable. You've shown your success in the classroom over several years based on multiple measures. You've consistently been at the top of your game.
The ripple effect of even one life, how it can impact lives for centuries to come. You know how I know that? Because I'm standing here because of teachers.
We all have that story. Well, there was this teacher.
He says, "Hi there, I'm Norm Card. I'm going to be your teacher." Never had a teacher shake my hand before.
For me in high school, it was a high school English teacher who saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. I remember having somebody who cared about me, somebody who was interested in me, and somebody who expected something of me.
A kid comes into our class long after they have forgotten the names of all the 50 capitals. What do they really learn? They learn, who am I? And what difference do I make? And how we answer those two questions decides the dreams we dream because of teachers.
So Celebrate Teaching is an ongoing attempt on our behalf to learn, share, honor inspired teaching. Let's Help for Kids, a little over a decade ago, was an idea how we might improve student achievement in Ohio. And we focused on collecting data. And part of it was the value-added metric, because our belief was that you can't improve a goal you don't measure, and worse yet, you can't improve one you don't have. So these were teachers today whom we honored who had shown great academic progress with their kids through multiple measures over time. And our theory of change is this, that if you have the right measures, value-added is one of them, we have others. You have the right people, you have the right practices, help people to do high-leverage strategies that matter. And you send the right messages that you get greater student achievement.
None of us know it all. And so it's vitally important that we ask each other for help, we support one another, and we build communities in schools that are healthy and foster the growth of learning. Because this is one of the most important things, if not the most important thing in our United States and in the world, education.
So on behalf of the thousands of students you have taught and will continue to teach, I want to say on their behalf, thank you very, very much.
Along came a teacher, Mr. Card.
Okay, that was a short piece put together by American Ed TV that came to our conference last year. There were 83 teachers, and I'm going to talk about those 83. 5 of them are from Columbus City Schools. They represented districts across this state whom we've been collecting data by individual teachers voluntarily so that we could begin to identify who are those teachers that are making incredible academic gains with kids year after year, not just one year, but multiple years and across different subjects. And what did we learn from them? Now, I want to start with teaching very quickly, and the teachers here know this. When you look at the increased expectations, knowing how to implement the Common Core, these 21st century skills, how important problem solving, creativity, all of these pieces are. You've got to know your content to be able to do this. Personalized learning, technology. We have a new teacher evaluation system. So there's a whole host of things in here. You get the sense that today's teacher, it is much, much different. I tell my daughter, who's a teacher, when I began 40 years ago, I was evaluated based upon what I did. For her, she's going to be evaluated on how her kids do. That is not a trivial transformation to be able to do this. And we're concerned about all kids, not a few kids, but elevating the achievement levels of all kids. Now, I talk a little bit about this because Battelle for Kids' roots are in value added. There's a difference between, obviously, measuring achievement and progress. Achievement is where you are at a certain point. Progress is where you started and where you are now. And it is important that we measure both. What I know is this: if we only want to measure achievement, all I have to do is look up average family income, because there is a huge correlation between that. That is not true for progress. Let me give you an example, and I'll just make this up. I could go, I guarantee you, 3 blocks from here, and I could find kids in the 3rd grade that know 50,000 words and can read any kind of book, and I know kids who don't know all the colors in the primary coloring book or box. And the truth of it is, when I get those kids, my job is to take them from where I find them and to take them somewhere higher than that. And all kids want, or all parents want their children to make gains. Now, if you look at this one, it's interesting. Under the current system, Jacob's school would be a success, and Adam's school would be a failure. But if I were buying stock and one of them was labeled Adam or Jacob, it would be the Adam stock I'm buying. So we absolutely need to look at the progress kids are making. The way you get to higher levels of achievement is to ratchet up progress year after year. And for kids who come in lower, the progress rate has to be higher. Now, how do we measure that? We measure it with this tool called value added. And one of the things I like about value added is this. Too often, the status of a teacher comes from the kids they teach. If I teach in an affluent suburban area, my status as a teacher is much different than the status I had as a teacher teaching in a poor river town where I grew up. Your status should never come from who you teach. Your status should come from what did you do with the kids you taught. And this gives us a glimpse, value added does, into what you did with groups of kids. Now, I need to say something. All measures are flawed. Some are useful. Value added is useful. And I'm just going to show you a scatter plot just to make a point here, because this is statewide data, and each of those represent a school. So if you take the bottom line, that's a poverty line, if you will, and I want you to look at the achievement. There is a relationship that the higher the poverty, the lower the achievement. That's the state of Ohio. That's not just Columbus, that's every building in Ohio. Now I want to give you another slide. This is value added. This is growth. That we have kids that are attending buildings with 0% poverty that are making great growth, and some aren't. And all the way out, that there's no relationship. It's what you do that matters. Because, frankly, value added is the difference between a predicted score and an observed score. And there are huge errors of measures and tests. I mean, a 7th grade kid could take a test and had a fight with his girlfriend, had a fight at the bus stop, doesn't do very well. Those things happen. And the way you suppress those is by having large numbers. But what we've seen over and over again is value added is a measure of the gains. And we've seen kids in affluent suburban areas make huge gains, and we have seen kids in areas of high poverty make huge gains and some not make gains. It gives us a productivity measure of the impact of teachers and schools on kids' academic performance. And part of the reason we do this, it gives hope. Why would you want to teach somewhere where kids are 3 or 4 years behind if all I'm going to be judged on is achievement? Part of what I want to be judged on is the growth I'm making with kids. And I know this, if I sustain that growth year after year, I will get to higher levels of achievement. We know that. We've seen that. We've been doing this for a long time. So measuring growth matters. But it's not the only measure. What do we know about great teaching? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is putting $500 million into their bet is the most important thing are effective teachers. That really matters. But I wouldn't want to mislead somebody to believe that if I just take highly effective teachers, plop them down in a building, that'll work. And I probably would use, I don't know, the Lakers as an example. If I take huge talent and just plop them down without coaching, without a system, and a whole bunch of other things, it won't matter. So leadership really matters here. So I need to say that. At the end of the day, it's not just about having talented teachers. And it's not just about having one tool. There's a book I want to refer to you by Paul Tough called How Children Succeed. And I've talked to one of the main researchers that he quotes in it, Angela Duckworth from Penn State. And it's very powerful because what it suggests is non-cognitive factors contribute as much to kids' success as cognitive factors. It's what I used to tell kids. Look, your I do is every bit as important as your IQ. Turns out, grit, perseverance, optimism, self-control, these things can be taught, and character counts. So when we're looking at this, if we only look at achievement, I would argue that's like climbing the ladder to success and realizing the ladder was on the wrong wall. It's not the only wall. So there are other walls we need to think about. So when we think about an effective teacher, it's not one that simply raises achievement. That's part of it. But there are these other pieces that matter a great deal, as it turns out, as kids not only get higher academic success because someone has taught and modeled and emphasized these non-cognitive pieces, but it also contributes to life success. If you look around this room and there was time to really do this, and I were to ask you, did you get where you got because of your ACT score? I suspect the answer to that isn't true. But I have to tell you what, I have no doubts about your grit and perseverance, and we learn through failure. It's when we have to wrestle with something, and this is something we want teachers to do, so that we set targets with kids, and we wrestle with learning, because it is through that we grow and become. So the Met study, Measures of Effective Teaching, really talk about the importance that no one single measure. We need multiple measures, and we need to combine them in ways that make sense. One of the ones that we have learned a great deal from are student surveys that you give to kids. And it's not to judge teachers, it's to give teachers information back on their practice, which will give them some indicators of where their kids should be. At the end of the day, you don't want teachers guessing about how they're going to do, and nor would I want a teacher teaching to a test. Kids doing well is a byproduct of doing a whole bunch of other things well. Now look, I coach, sometimes not very successfully, but at the end of the day, did I want my kids to win? Absolutely. But winning was a byproduct of having done a whole bunch of other things well. Learning is the same way. It's a byproduct of doing lots of other things well. It's not just the test at the end of the year. Now, what is a great teacher? Very quickly, how do we identify these folks? Multiple years of data that they raised the progress of groups of kids. And they did it for multiple years in multiple subjects. The teachers that you saw in that short clip, many of them also gave student surveys. And we analyzed those. We talked to all their principals. Principals make observations about teachers all the time. And they were consistent with that. So we wanted to be sure that we had 83 of the very best teachers because we want to learn from them. I would argue school systems need to figure out, how do I take the talents of these people and I leverage them with other teachers? These matter. And we had them from multiple states. And as we brought him in, our research team, and I really want to thank Mike Thomas, who should be doing this, because he did the work on this and has met with countless highly effective teachers to figure out, what is it that you do? Now, I'm going to give you a quick glimpse of what we learned from them. Now, these are the 4 things, but rather than give you a laundry list, I want to give you this competing values framework. Professor Quinn is from the Ross School of Business at the University of Michigan. And one of our researchers had used much of his work and said, this seems to really fit. So we called Professor Quinn. He came down about 3 years ago, and his next book's going to be about highly effective teachers. His first 17 books were about highly effective businesses and highly effective CEOs. And in developing this framework, what he says, and I'll give this to you very quickly, he says there are 4 things that really matter. So think about the organizations you work for, not teachers or teaching for a minute. In this upper left-hand quadrant, this is about building relationships. In a business, this might be all the HR functions, building consensus, improving morale, the people things you do. Now, sometimes that the opposite is over here where Carol is, and it's results. It's about getting results. That's the purpose of an organization. We identify results and we get these. And sometimes they can be competing. They're both important. Now, the other two is about innovation, creativity, your R&D department. And then across from it is routines and the structures we put in place to make sure something's carried out with fidelity. This has been his model for highly effective organizations for a long time, and this is a quick sketch of it. Here's what it looks like with teachers, and this is what we found. And in talking to some of the teachers who are going to be here in just a few minutes, we talked about this because some of them have not seen this. Do teachers build relationships with kids? Absolutely. Do kids work harder for somebody they think cares about them? That's a duh. It is not the opposite of learning. And in fact, if you build that relationship, you're much more likely to get results. Because at the end of the day, I do expect something of you. Now, if I go too far in any one of these, it doesn't work. For example, if I go too far over here, it's like, oh, I just love the kids. They don't learn anything, but I love them. And if I go over here, it's like, well, welcome to the sweatshop. You know, you're going to do this. Da, da. At the end of the day, these are competing, and our job, the highly effective teachers, integrate these. And they have given us lots of descriptions about how they build relationships, how they expect much of kids. Because if we don't expect enough of them, they'll live up or down to the expectations. Now, across this way, this is about creativity. I've never met a teacher who thought, wow, wonder how I can put some curriculum together for this unit that would be engaging and interesting to kids. Or you have that moment in the classroom and you say, okay, stop. Just put things down. Let's talk about this. Because you have that moment, and it's searching for those. And right back here where Chad is, this isn't any different than when I started teaching 40 years ago. Classroom management. At the end of the day, being able to create a situation where you're in charge of the classroom really matters. It always has mattered. Now, I can tell you there were those people who said to me, don't smile till Christmas. You know what I've learned in 40 years? The people don't smile before Christmas. They don't smile after Christmas. So at the end of the day, we need these structures and routines. This is how we run this classroom. And whether I walk in a high school classroom and I have the ACT question of the day, and this is how we're starting class, or some other way, I have structures and routines. And I also know when and how to infuse creativity, whether it's getting ideas from somebody else. What we have learned from these highly effective teachers, they do all these, they integrate these. And what Professor Quinn says, that's exactly what a CEO has to do in his or her company. These 4 quadrants matter. And we have learned from teachers lots of specific strategies around how you do this. Teaching is too complex that sometimes we just want a simple answer. We want it to look like it's going to appear on the front of a Red Book magazine. You know, 5 ways to fix your hair, 4 ways to be a better teacher, 3 ways to improve your personality. It's just not that simple. This is incredibly complex, this process of building intellectual capital in children. But it is through these 4 doors that highly effective teachers do it. And they integrate these. So it's not one or the other. It's how do I integrate building relationships with kids, wanting something from them, looking for creative and innovative ideas to spark and interest them, and at the same time being in charge. So these quadrants are critically important. Again, when we look at these, we could talk much about these, but it gives you the idea of this. Now, leadership, and I need to say this, leadership really matters. The idea that we can just take highly effective teachers, plop them down in a building, and they'll be successful is simply not true. I will tell you this, that building principles, and I was a building principal at a couple different levels, building principles and teachers together account for probably 90% of the academic gains kids make. These are the people that do the work. And what we don't want to be as a group is nothing's impossible for those who don't have to do the work. That these folks need our expectations, they need new ideas, but they also need support. With leadership, These are the things the Wallace Foundation has said over and over again in their studies about what matters in leadership. And I won't read them to you, but you can certainly see it, that having a climate in a building really matters. And you get a sense of a climate from the time you go in, whether or not there are high expectations, because whatever the principal suggests, reflects, and does has an impact on what teachers do. And I have learned that if you don't feed the teachers, they'll eat the kids. So the idea of making sure that whatever I expect as a principal of teachers to kids, I need to demonstrate. It matters. So, and improving instruction, these pieces. Now, what do we find about principals? Because we've done the same thing in bringing principals in. It's the same thing. What is it a principal does building-wide to improve relationships? What do we do to get results? How do we foster creativity? What are the structures that we put in place? If I'm a building principal and I say something like, if we do silent, sustained reading each day for 15 minutes, research suggests we'll improve reading comprehension by so many points. That's not an expectation, it's a statement. An expectation would be, if we do silent, sustained reading for 15 minutes a day, we'll improve reading comprehension, and starting Monday, we're going to do that, and I'm going to have a book, and I expect everybody here to have a book. And demonstrate it and model it, because what I've learned with leadership, whatever you expect, you need to inspect. And then you also need to respect, meaning you do it. So leadership matters, we've learned. Here's what teachers have told us they want from principals. Support. And that comes, that collaboration time of materials, affirmation and challenge. If you read Daniel Pink's work, the author who grew up in Bexley, who wrote a book called Drive, he talks about purpose, autonomy, and mastery, and how important those are to intrinsic motivation. And these are shared with teachers. They want leadership. They want somebody to model excellence. You get what you give. You want people to show up on time and work hard? You need to show up on time and work hard. Autonomy, a license to experiment, and to stand alongside. I'm with you in this journey. We have something that we want to accomplish for our children. Now, one of the challenges, and here's Columbus, and this is typical in many, many places, we're going to have less teachers. And Columbus has made adjustments over time as they have lost students. They've made adjustments with staff. They don't have the same number. So as we have less teachers, what we have to figure out is how do we make the folks we have more effective? Because if principals and teachers are the key, the only two choices I know are to get all new ones or develop the ones we have. I would argue the second strategy is far more profitable than just simply, I don't know any place that has fired their way into success. Or I haven't read a book called Evaluated into Greatness. I haven't seen those things. We need to develop people. So we hire for talent, we develop by strength, and we expect much. So this is what teachers had said. This is Columbus. The very last thing I want to tell you, and I'm going to give, Matt's going to give you a handout. What have we learned from schools across this state that have made dramatic growth? And I could give you lots of examples, and I won't. I'll just leave these with you. It is limiting the goals. You need to focus. Focus really matters. The structures and routines and balanced assessment so that it's not just an end-of-year test. Teachers who use really good pedagogy are setting learning targets with kids, and we're helping them to understand how to do that and using multiple measures so it's not just about achievement or even just about value added, that I would use student surveys. And empowerment. And empowerment is when I look at you and say, I'm going to hold you accountable, but I'm going to give you some autonomy. If you both script the play, then you own the results too. So we've got to give people the opportunity to do what they do best with kids and hold them accountable for it. And we see that in lots of places. Now, I apologize for talking about 500 words a minute with Gus up to 700, but it gives you some sense of some things that I think we've learned that make a difference. Teaching and leading matters. So in all the ideas that you begin to put together about how we're going to move Columbus City Schools forward, these will be at the heart of it. Now, at this point, I want to introduce our teacher panels would come up, because you can certainly react to some of what I've said here, and I'll introduce these folks as they come up.
Here goes nothing.
I just want to say this is an outstanding group, and I've taken most of your time, so I don't want to go through long introductions because you can read it. It's just what has been assembled is an outstanding representative group of excellent teachers. And I'll start first by quickly introducing them. This young lady here is Elizabeth McNally, who's at East Haven, who's an ESL teacher. Dr. McNally got her PhD at Ohio State. And next to her is Thomas Trang, who's a national board certified teacher, chemistry at Columbus. And then is Courtney Crenshaw, who's a dance teacher at the Arts and College Preparatory Academy. And last is Becky Calafina, who's a 6th grade teacher at Holt Crossing, which has made incredible progress over time. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions to them, and then if there are questions that you want to ask them, we want to have that opportunity to do that. Let me start with, I painted some of the challenges. I may not have them right, but I want you to tell us a little bit about you and the challenges you face and why you enjoy facing them.
As Mr. Mahoney said, my name is Elizabeth McNally. I've been a teacher with Columbus City Schools for 12 years. I teach on the east side in an elementary school that's a pre-K-5 building. We had 2 preschool units, which has been an amazing addition to our school. We have about a 35% ESL population. We have 19 countries represented in our building, and that's been pretty stable, in 11 different languages. So about 35% of our building speaks a language other than English as a first language. And I have a few students who speak more than 3 or 4 languages. So that's been one of the main struggles that we face. We have over a 90% free and reduced lunch rate. So, thank you.
I'm Thomas Trang. I currently teach at Columbus International High School. We're in the same predicament. There are 410 students in our building. 22% of them are ESL. 72% are African American, 15% Latinos, and 11% white. 81% of our school is free and reduced lunch. But the positive side about it too is we have teachers from 10 different countries speaking 11 different languages. So at the international school, we developed the school using a community task force where we have partnerships with OSU, Columbus World Council, and we infuse global education into our school, where students learn a second language as a major for 3 years and go into AP classes such as Mandarin Chinese, French, and Spanish. And they also minor in a third language, such as Russian, Chinese, Spanish, possibly Arabic next year. So we have the same issues where students are mobile. They have issues coming because of attendance, absence, social economic issues. So we face the same challenges.
Hi, I'm Courtney Crenshaw. I teach dance at the Arts and College Preparatory Academy, which is a charter school here in Columbus. We're in our 3rd year of excellent ratings. We have about 264 students total. Most of our students travel from several places. Some of them are in the city, some of them are in Reynoldsburg, Westerville. We have some students in Canal, Gahanna, so they all come from different districts to us. So I guess maybe that's one of our challenges too, is transportation, getting students there for attendance, and also bringing students to one same page because they come from different educational backgrounds. This is my 4th year teaching at the school. Most of our students are come from backgrounds where they were bullied or picked on. And so when they come to our school, because we have a strong anti-bullying policy, that's another challenge that we're dealing with, how to make the student comfortable and continue their learning and be successful from there. So.
Hi, I'm Becky Catalfina. This is my 20th year of teaching in Southwestern City Schools. I'm proud to say I'm a product of Southwestern City Schools, so it was the first and only place I applied to because I had teachers who meant a lot to me. His name was Mr. Houston for me, and I wanted to immediately go back to where I came from and make a difference for children. I currently teach at Holt Crossing Intermediate 6th grade math and science, 11 and 12-year-olds. I've done that for 20 years. They're a very interesting group. We have 713 students in our building. We are at 65% economically disadvantaged, so we're above even our district's average. We have 12% are IEP students, and 17% of our building is LEP, language English proficient. I think that's, as a teacher in the classroom, the biggest challenge I face, in addition to all the things that were previously mentioned, is how do I take kids that are at the low end and kids that are at the high end and move them forward? And as Jim described, it's a very complex process, and if someone were to just ask me, how do you do it, there isn't one answer. But it's the challenge we face every single day that we step into the classroom, because each of our students deserve that. So, thank you.
I want somebody to answer, but we talked about the Common Core, because this is a challenge to implement it. What kinds of supports would be helpful to you to implement it if it is a challenge? Somebody want to start with that?
My district has been being proactive. I've had the Common Core in my hands for 2 years now. We have been looking at unwrapping the standards. What does this mean? We've had the model curriculum in front of us. They plan professional development opportunities. It's definitely a priority in our district, is to give me time to collaborate with colleagues, to work with math coaches. And so we have already started looking at what elements that were in the old standards are still in my Common Core standards, what things are new. So my personal professional development has been looking at what are the areas that I'm not comfortable with in my content. Fortunately for me, there's a lot of things that are the same, but there were several things, particularly in the data analysis area I'm looking at. I have to grow as a professional. There's things that I wasn't sure how to teach or how to approach. So our conversations in our PLCs have been circled around those items. I have to make sure when I step in front of kids, I know what I'm talking about, and I can lead them in ways that will allow them to grow. So, in our district, providing professional development has been, and collaboration, time for collaboration, and the fact that my district values my opinion, that I can have input into what happens in my classroom and allow me to serve on the course of study committee, allow me to be a part of making those curricular resources for teachers, and being a part of that, allowing teachers to lead teachers has been very crucial in support in our district.
Other?
Has also been very proactive in allowing us opportunities to collaborate with each other through weekly PLCs, or professional learning communities, where we meet together and discuss goals for our students. Our district just recently changed to feeder pattern professional developments, where we've been able to focus almost like small communities within a larger community and really focus on what our feeder needs to work on. So we've been able to really implement Common Core changes through those routes.
I know with science, it's a different story. Math, right now it's focusing on math and literacy in English language. But in science, we just saw like a test release, bank of questions, and I attempted to take one of those, and this was just a couple of days ago, and it took me 20 minutes just to figure out how to use this microscope that was digital. I can teach my students how to use the actual microscope, but to have them focus it, select on the different buttons, use a fine, I think it's a scroll bar on it, and it was a challenge for me just to figure it out. And with our district, with technology so limited and with the digital divide, I think teachers and students need that practice. They need technology that's reliable. They need professional development to expose teachers that this is what's going to be coming up, and we need to prepare both teachers and students.
I think teachers are comfortable with changing to the Common Core standards. We're professionals. We understand how standards work. So that'll be a transition. but there's a big concern about the assessments that are coming and making sure that our students are prepared for them, because if you look nationally at what's happening as students begin to take these assessments, there's a dip in test scores because there's this new evaluation system in place, and teachers are worried about being held accountable to that in those first few years when this is what's happening nationally anytime a new assessment comes to place.
Okay. What about, let's talk about outcomes. If you got to be the czar and you could say, these are the things teachers need, and if they had these, there would be no excuses. What would be some of your ideas about those levers of support that would really make a difference for you and your students?
I can think of one right now, and that would be, it's a major one for us, especially arts teachers, and that would be facilities, the right kind of area or place to be able to be creative with the students. For us, we have pretty limited space, and so we have to kind of divide the students, and sometimes they're not able to get into some of the courses that they would like to take. And so if we had that proper facility, it would be work for us. Also, we don't have a performance space, so we have to spend money to go and find a place to perform. So if we had something in-house, like an auditorium or something like that, that would work for us.
Okay.
I love this question because when we sit together as colleagues, I will often say, if I were queen of the forest, this is how I would do it. So I've actually thought about this on a lot of different occasions. And one of the things that I think that teachers are crying out for, we're professionals. What I see in the classrooms is teachers, there are amazing teachers in Columbus City schools, but what we need is support from our community. I loved the videos earlier on in the day when they talked about this need for more community involvement in our schools. We need big brothers and big sisters, so I was so happy to meet you today. Thank you for that. We need counselors who can counsel and not be test coordinators. We need nurses who can be nurses. All of these different support systems that are in place that because of budget cuts, and I understand there's a real tension there between what our budgets are and what our needs are, but in communities where we have these high needs, we need adult education and community education and increased preschools. We've gotten ESL students in preschools now with permission to ride buses with special harnesses because they're small people. And we have these great opportunities for them to come in and get those jump starts on kindergarten readiness, which is so crucial. Preschool education is huge. So just listening this morning and hearing what you folks were talking about are really important things. We have amazing teachers. We need all these other things to fall into line to really help us.
Okay.
I totally agree with Elizabeth. I know when my experience at Metro High School, which is a smaller school compared to Columbus district, which has 22 high schools, we always invited guest speakers to come to our school to speak to either a seminar class every Friday, or they come to evaluate students during the presentations. So when students see role models like scientists or technicians or doctors and lawyers come to them, and college students coming to grade them, they can make a connection. Oh, I can aspire to be this person, or I can be a lawyer or a doctor or engineer. I can ask them questions, And with the school that I'm at, we do occasionally have people that come in to speak to us, but it's not often. Okay. And I would like to see more of that. And I was telling a story when we were visiting. One of the, I think, most memorable teaching experiences I had was when I was at West High School. My students I had a partnership with the primate cognitive department with OSU, which works with chimpanzees. And my students created a project where they designed puzzles, games to test the cognitions of chimps. And they collected data, did problem solving, critical thinking, everything we talked about this morning. And I said, why not, since we learned about all these primatologists, chimpanzee behavior, why not write a letter to Dr. Jane Goodall? And you know what? She replied, and she's like, I would love to meet your students. So she invited my class to meet with her and do a presentation at the University of Akron. And this was life-changing for these kids and their parents to actually see, besides me being the evaluator, they had an expert to evaluate their projects. And that's what I mean by partnerships and getting people involved in our schools. And I like to see that happening more and more.
Becky?
Well, when we think about the implementation of the Common Core, as teachers, mostly what I hear is we're very concerned that we're being assessed and judged this first year that it's to be implemented. You know, I work with my students and we look at how do I analyze a question when I'm being asked to do something. How do I make sure that I am being complete in my response? That if I've been asked to do 3 things or 4 things, you know, am I answering all parts of the question? I think about if a student is given a task when they become a member of the workforce and their supervisor gives them a task, are they going to do all those parts? So I think that's kind of a prerequisite when we take these type of assessments. That's one thing I can teach my students in terms of being ready for the workforce. So one of the strategies we've used is how to analyze a question. You know, make sure I'm really attending to all the parts of those things and really getting at what are they asking me? What mathematical principle are they asking me to address? So we leave thinking tracks on our test and we write, this is what I know, this is, you know, what I think I'm supposed to do, and these are the steps I can take to answer those. So we have a piece of paper in front of us. And I'm very concerned, as well as other teachers, when we go to this new computerized assessment, what is the process for getting my kids who do their thinking tracks, we call them, on paper, how do I get that to be translated on a computer? And am I going to get an effective measure if that doesn't occur? That's concerning to me. So I would like some time, as well as I believe other teachers would, to figure that out. I need to figure that out.
Okay. I want to, at this time, I want to ask any of the members if you have a question you'd like to ask. I have several more, but I wanted to just pause here and allow any of you who may have a question for our panelists.
It'll go on.
I heard a few of you reference the PLCs and how beneficial that had been for you. I wonder if you have the opportunity to do that in collaboration with other districts that have been proven to be effective. Is there much that happens across district lines?
I've not had an experience where we cross over. I also work for the Office of Outreach and Engagement at Ohio State, teaching other teachers how to be TESOL endorsed. So I've had an opportunity to go into like Southwestern city schools and work with some amazing teachers, but not in a PLC capacity.
Within our district, though, PLCs have had conversations and had opportunities. We are allowed to all be represented on our course of study. So there's lots of opportunities for us to share in and amongst our different groups, what different groups are accomplishing in terms of their work. A struggle for us is we've always had very good conversations about teaching and learning within our PLCs. For us now, we're shifting in our district, and my principal has challenged us to spend 50% of our time looking at our data results and allowing the conversations about what have students learned to come from the data. What does the data tell me about what my students know and are able to do? And so that is something that, you know, we're trying to learn from one another, but we have not experienced any, you know, out-of-district cooperation in that manner.
But along those lines, when our district moved to the feeder patterns for our professional development days, we're now not only meeting with our individual buildings, but we're also collaborating with other elementary schools and other middle schools, so we can look at alignment and data across our feeder pattern, which has been very beneficial for us as well.
Pat?
In one of Jim's slides, he mentions that leadership is second only to classroom instruction among all school-related factors that contribute to what students learn at school. I'm wondering if you have any observations that you would make, not only from your own school, but with your colleagues, about reflections on the principals in your buildings and the impact that they've had on making you successful, or maybe colleagues who haven't been successful.
I have been very fortunate to work with phenomenal principals in Southwestern, and I think it's part of the district's philosophy is to make sure that principals are aware of what's going on. In every content area, our principals are expected to know what mathematical practices are. So when they walk in my classroom, they're able to have a professional conversation about whether or not I address those in my instruction. What we want in a principal is I want someone who will stand with me and beside me and will support me. And more than anything, believe in me and believe that what I'm doing is good for children and trust me. So if she thinks it's one way, but I think it's a different way. We can have an intelligent conversation, and if I have good backing and reason behind what I'm doing, and I'm being successful, then I don't need to follow some cookie cutter recipe for what an effective teacher is, because what I'm doing is working in my classroom, and being valued to me is the most important thing in a principal.
And for me, I think I've been also fortunate to work with principals that are very innovative. They are willing to take risk and try new ideas to help the building become and students become successful. If a student is absent or tardy or needs extra help in language, then a tutor is provided. Or if a teacher needs professional development, let's have those PLCs, let's talk about it, let's look at the data and to help the teacher be more successful. And I look at principals as principal teachers of our school building. They're a role model, so if they're really hardworking, it's a reflection of that school.
Absolutely.
I too have excellent principals at our school. Coming in my first year teaching, they were always there, supportive. They're always sending me professional development ideas, places to go, things to do. They're helping me understand exactly how to involve community and other outside resources into my classroom. They enforce collaboration with all of the teachers. That's one of their main goals, or one of their main characteristics that they're looking for within all of their teachers that they hire is, can you collaborate? And they're willing to work with you. On Wednesdays, we have something called Wednesday workshops. So we break away from our normal schedule, and students take a deeper look into subject matters, and teachers work together. For instance, we had a dance and physics kind of collaboration workshop where we learned physics concepts through movement, like friction and motion and things like that. So it was really cool. But our principals have come in and been engaged and involved in those opportunities, so students are seeing them involved in the learning process. And they've also helped to co-teach some themselves. I feel that our principals are always there to back you up. If you need help, their doors are always open, so I can go in and speak with them if I need help or assistance in something. So we have really, really effective principals.
Danny, you had a question?
So can I go back to your training to be a teacher? Could you share how effective your teaching background training was for you, and did it meet the expectations, and did it prepare you for where you are today?
I was trained at a small liberal arts college in Pennsylvania to be a high school 7 to 12 English teacher. So I was trained for Shakespeare and Byron, and I was hired to teach 3-5 ESL for pre-functional English speakers. So I was very much supported by our PAR program, so we have like mentor teachers, and also through the other amazing teachers in my building. So I promised to go back. When I was hired, it was during a time when there were not nearly enough English as a second language teachers for the population that we had. So I promised that I would take classes. And so I immediately, through the agreement that our school district has with the Ohio Dominican, went and got my TESOL endorsement, kept right on to get my master's in early childhood ed because I felt like I needed that, and then went on to get the PhD in foreign and second language education. So I always felt like I could do more to help my students, and I just kept going. Right now I'm almost through my administrator's license program. So I've been teaching for 12 years and I have not stopped. But I don't know that you can ever feel like you have enough to be able to do what we do. The kids are always changing, the technology is always changing. I don't know of any teachers that say, well, I'm good now. I'm good, I've had enough. That's just
I had a unique start to my career. I attended Ohio State and received my bachelor's in curriculum or in education there. My senior year, I had the opportunity to be part of a group, I believe, of 26 students who participated in an internship. And it was the best decision I ever made in terms of professional development. I didn't know it at the time, but I basically agreed to be a one-year intern in Southwestern City Schools. And I was paired with a mentor teacher, and I was expected to be there from the first day of school till the very last day of school. So I never really had a first year completely on my own. I was mentored through my entire year. My cooperating teacher sat with me, we planned. When we were sitting there and planning lessons, she would say, what questions should we ask now? You know, in this part of the lesson, what would be a good question to ask? I don't know that I would have known to do that initially. I would have eventually figured it out, but it would have taken me much longer. So seeing the school year from beginning to end was the most invaluable. I was fearless my second year because I had already been there and done that, and I was ready to start really, you know, taking ownership in my own learning. And then after that, she taught in a room where there were 60 kids. The wall was knocked out, and the two of them shared instruction. One would instruct, and the other would be there to do individual assistance as needed throughout the lesson. So the year I was there were 3 of us. Well, he ended up taking a job in another district. So of course, I ended up getting that position. So for another 5 years, I believe, we taught in a classroom together. So I had, you know, 6 years of mentoring from a phenomenal teacher who's sitting back there, I must say. So it's very unique, but if I could make a recommendation to this commission, it would be to work with a college or university like OSU. I don't know why they ever stopped that, or if they did stop it, I'm not sure. I even participated in a study, it was called Bug in the Ear, where a graduate student, she allowed me to have a little hearing device, and my mentor teacher had a microphone. While I was teaching, she was prompting me. Look at this person over here. If I didn't notice, look at this person. Maybe you should ask this question. You know, so-and-so's not with you. All those things you don't know to do as a new teacher. So I was very fortunate, and I believe that's, you know, one of the reasons I think I was given the perfect model, and I have, you know, tried to pursue that ever since then.
Mayor?
Yes. You're a dance teacher, right?
Yes.
I would ask you to do just one thing. I saw Judge Marbley dancing the other day. And I would ask that you teach him how to dance.
I might be hopeless.
Yeah.
I could probably do that.
Could you? In all seriousness, a question, you talked about principles. All of you have great principles. And my question is, do you think that the teachers or that you feel that your principal has enough flexibility in the management of his or her environment and the building to give you the freedom to do what you have to do in teaching?
Well, I'll go first. I know that our principal, he lets the department chairs and, you know, come up with ideas. We're in the school leadership team where we all collaborate and, you know, come up with decisions as a school rather than just principals. And then we have, you know, 9th grade team leaders, 10th grade team leaders, and so on. So we have the flexibility and freedom to make decisions that he will support. So that's what I like about that in our building. So.
This is the first year. We have a new principal here in my building at Holt Crossing. And so, you know, we're in that process of getting to know what his expectations are. But the thing I like about what he said, I was on the interview committee, and he said, you know, I want to work with my teachers, kind of be their coach. But he said, the framework he works from is that I love you, but we got to move. You know, so he's going to keep us in that discomfort because you have to be moving forward. You have to constantly be changing and growing. And so when someone can approach me from that perspective, I have a great deal of respect for that. And so that's kind of the way he operates. He sets the expectations of things we need to accomplish. He's set the expectation that we spend 50% of our time talking about data, and our curricular conversations and decisions come out of that. However, he's allowed us to make decisions on what does that look like within our PLCs. So again, that gives me the autonomy. What makes sense for our group? And I work with a group of 7 math teachers in my PLC, and he has allowed us to make that decision. So I think that's very critical.
All of you have great principles, right?
Yes.
I mean, and that's great. What do you think your comrades think? Other teachers around your respective districts, not all Columbus, but all your respective districts. Do you think that the principals are empowered enough at their level to have the flexibility to do what is necessary for you to be successful in the classroom? What do you hear? You all talk, I'm sure teachers talk.
I think from what I see, and this is just what I see, I think that the teachers are often, or the principals are often pulled in multiple directions. There's often a lot of meetings when they're pulled out of the buildings. So they're being pulled in a lot of directions, I'm sure. They each have their strengths and weaknesses. But I've worked for really wonderful principals, but I think that there's a lot of pressure on them as well. It's this accountability pressure that's being pushed down, and they're being held responsible and accountable to a lot of things as well that are the same frustrations and worries for teachers.
Okay. Please join me in thanking our teacher panel. We really appreciate coming and sharing. And I'm going to turn it back over to Eric. And I just want to say one last thing. I think what you are doing is critically important. No one in this country has figured out how to crack the code to really help large groups of kids, particularly those faced with challenges of poverty, etc., to really, really be successful. And the challenge you're taking on and the right people to do this are here. So I just want to congratulate you.
What I just said to Jim Mahoney is I love you, but we got to move. Jim, thank you so much. Jim is a terrific leader nationally and certainly in our community. We're so fortunate that he was here. Thank you to the teachers. They're terrific. We're rounding the bend and heading down the home stretch. We have one last thing we need to talk about if we're being comprehensive in this subject of strong teachers and leaders. I'm going to be joined by Tom Goodney. You met Tom a couple weeks ago. Last time you met him, since last you met him, he became the acting superintendent of the Franklin County ESC. So welcome back, Tom Goodney. Tom has got years of experience as a district superintendent as well as a teacher, and now, of course, the superintendent of our county educational service center. He's going to be joined in a moment by Tony Bagshaw, who's also from Battelle for Kids, who's got 26 years as a superintendent and a teacher and a coach and a state administrator, and he's been at every level. So here's the question that I want to ask Tom and Tony to just say a word to you about before we leave. So if we're going to have quality teachers and principals in Columbus, not just in the city schools, but also in our charters and in all of our schools, you've got to have a whole pipeline. And last time I checked, the pipeline isn't just about all the wonderful things we heard here about supporting the teachers we have. You got to recruit them in the first place. You got to bring in quality teachers in the door, and you got to keep them when you have good teachers. So Tom and Tony, I want to tell you two things I've heard around town, and I want to get your reaction. First of all, tell me if it's true, and if it's true, is it something we can do about it? So on one hand, I've had people inside the school district tell me that we often don't know until the fall how many teachers we need, and therefore by the time we go out and recruit and hire teachers, September, maybe even sometimes October, we're not exactly recruiting from the top of the candidate pool. So that's the pipeline into the district in the first place. And then I've had superintendents from the suburbs, I will not mention their names, but it's been more than one, who tell me that when they have an opening in their suburban school district and they post that opening, they get their pick of Columbus teachers. Every high-performing teacher that they know of is, or maybe not every, but they get a lot of applications from high-performing Columbus teachers who are interested in moving on to one of those situations. So if I think about, are we getting in the folks in the right place? We know we get some stars, no matter what we're doing recruiting. We're clearly getting some stars, but then if we're losing some of our stars, I'm worried about that quality pipeline. So is what I've heard right, or is that all wet? And what do you think about that?
I'll reserve comment on the first one because I don't know the specifics, but what I would tell you is that my former colleagues in my old role as deputy superintendent, we convene quarterly. Every school personnel administrator, assistant superintendent for personnel 4 times per year. And a lot gets discussed in those meetings about recruitment and about placement. And the districts that there's a level of pride when they can say that they have all of their teacher slots filled by the June board meeting. They feel like they've gone out, they've targeted, they know what positions that they're going to have open, or they know what positions that they want to stack because they're likely to get some attrition over the summer, some retirements and some people leaving, and they like to have all their hiring done by the June board meeting. And they're disgusted when they have to bring some recommendations forward at the July board meeting, but they don't want to get to August with any holes to fill. Obviously, that happens from time to time. In terms of the supply chain of teachers coming out of the Columbus schools, that's not a myth, that's a reality. And I think any superintendent or personnel director will tell you that when they have critical hires to make, I happen to reside in Bexley, and talking to my daughter's principal, they'll have an opening. Yes, question, Mayor.
If that's the case, why would they leave Columbus to go to another school district? Are they paying more?
In some cases, sure.
Mm-hmm.
What
are they saying? What's the recruiting?
I think what they're
incentive?
recruiting, Mayor, is what I've heard from those colleagues is they know that if they get a Columbus schools teacher after 2, 3, 4 years of experience, they get someone who's been very well trained, a lot of professional development money's been invested, and they've worked in a variety of school contexts, and they're prepared to work with a lot of diverse learners.
What do you think, Tony? Answer the mayor's question. Why are they leaving?
Well, I can only speak to, I was the assistant superintendent in Wyoming City in Cincinnati, which is a suburban district where, and we had our pick. I can't really refute any of that. Money is a factor, and I think there is a, as Dr. Mahoney said earlier, this notion that you do gain prestige by your kids. There is a prestige factor, I believe, in some of those suburban districts. If I had, that's my honest answer to that. I can't speak to Columbus specifically because I don't know the context. The other thing I will tell you, absolutely, if you contact the Gallup folks about the general deterioration of the pool across time, that is absolutely factual. So if there are circumstances where you're recruiting later than you would like, that's absolutely true, that would impact your ability to get talent.
So what are some of the best practices out there? What are some of the things that we should be seeing a district do? You mentioned the time of year when hiring should be made. How do we make sure that's the case? What do those districts do that enables them to do that? Tom, Tony, what are some of the what should we be thinking about talent pipeline and human capital management? These teachers are terrific. How do we get more of them in, and how do we keep them in?
Well, I think you need to start with a communications and branding effort. I think there are wonderful things that are going on in Columbus. I mean, I've been in many of those schools, worked with many of those schools, so I do think there are some issues that could be solved, with that aspect of things to increase the overall pool that's coming. Now, in terms of the transactional aspects and making sure the postings get done promptly and you get through all of those aspects quickly, that's going to solve some of your timing issues.
Tom?
What I hear from my colleagues is that, to your question about a best practice or a better practice or a promising practice, whether it's Columbus, whether it's Southwestern or in some of our suburban districts, they may have staffing plans that aren't necessarily aligned with a recruitment strategy, which aren't necessarily aligned with any retention activities or any professional development plans. And they will admit, we've got to figure out a way to get a comprehensive human capital management strategy in place, but oftentimes the bureaucracies within any school district leave personnel administrators to do their work, curriculum instruction and teaching and leader work to do theirs, and there's not a lot of cohesive work. And I know Battelle for Kids does quite a bit in that area, so
Tony,
I'll
what do you
refer to
think?
Tony.
Sure. I'll get to the comprehensive piece. The other thing I would consider doing is you obviously have tremendous talent. You've got some rock star teachers. We've seen people have success in going back and looking at their hires across time and differentiating and saying, okay, where did we get the best of the best? What was the path that led them to us? There's obviously another side of that conversation, and doing some work and studying that to discern how you might find more of those folks.
We've got some questions from the commission. Alex, and then Judge.
So in corporate America, the role of the board of directors is, fundamental in terms of the human capital equation across the leadership of an enterprise. I'd be interested in your impressions of, not generic to a specific school district, but generic to school districts that you witness, the role of the board in human capital, number one, and maybe even just a more provocative question. We've talked about leadership at the principal level and opinions there, and then with superintendents, do you have opinions generically across school board leadership that you've seen operating?
I was actually on a school board for 6 years. If I think about the board role of this, I think it would be to frankly say we're going to get serious about this aspect of things. I think you're going to have to, at some point, say, hey, we're going to do this. We've spent enough time talking about the system. We need to get serious about the people in the system and make it an organizational priority. If you're asked, I'm not sure if I heard in there, is there a place to point where there is a particular district that is doing that particularly well? There are all sorts of pieces and parts and places you can go to find components of this.
Yeah, I was more interested in your impressions of the quality of school boards that you see operating around various districts.
We see some great ones. We see some that struggle. And I would argue that the distribution of boards and their functionality is not a great deal different than a normal distribution. But we see some absolute. When I was in Wyoming City, we had an incredible board.
And tell me so if I drill down on that, tell me what the quality from your perspective, where you were operating of a great board.
Deeply committed to the district, tremendous passion about the kids there, and knew when to say, hey, this is where we're going. We are going to get here, but we hired you to get there. From my perspective.
Judge Marbley.
I want to know what you all thought about organizations such as Teach for America, which I know that we don't have it yet in Columbus, but we certainly have a number of TFA alumni who have, distinguished themselves in the classroom. So as an alternative resource for the recruitment of teachers, what has your experience been in that being a good source, or organizations like that being a good source for the recruitment of talented teachers?
We have a partnership right now with the Ohio Department of Education, Judge, where we're assisting the work of Teach for America in Ohio by ostensibly fiscal agent work. And what I've witnessed with the folks from Teach for America is that they have obviously total dedication and commitment to identifying talent that are willing to go to some of the places that have the hardest to serve youngsters. And I think we need every bit of that in Ohio that we could possibly have. However, we're a net supplier of teachers in the country. We have adequate supply, certainly across a lot of the licensure spans, and so you're always going to have that tension. But even though we have that great supply, not all of them are adequately prepared, and not all of them are willing to go into those environments. And so what we see here in Cincinnati and in Cleveland and some of the areas is a commitment both by Ohio and by Teach for America to plug those two together. I have some data back at the office. I don't have it with me, but it's a very small footprint that we're seeing emerge right now. And so we'll have to see how that develops. But what I've been impressed by on the front end is the sort of the pre-service work they do with those folks, but even in talking with them, as they talked about bringing that talent now to Ohio, when I sat down with them and talked about all of the other pieces that you have to go into a classroom in Ohio. Some of them are regulatory trainings. We've passed lots of legislation on safety and violence prevention and detection and all of these other pieces. They didn't offer that within their pre-service. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is plug in all of these other trainings and preparation elements so they hit the ground in Ohio, ready to go, ready to teach in an Ohio classroom, connected to all the other requirements that you have to have. I don't know if Tony has any experience in his race to the top states with Teach for America, but pretty impressed would be my statement, Judge.
Other questions? Mrs. Perkins.
Bit Chip over here, too.
Education has had numerous conversations regarding teacher salaries, and all understand the importance of being competitive, not only in regards to teachers, but principals as well, where we have many qualified principals that, quite frankly, get better opportunities, particularly financially. We've also found that we've had challenges filling other administrative positions as well due to salary. It took us about 1.5 years just to replace our Chief Information Officer, who I wanted to introduce, who was here earlier today. But one of the main issues that we wrestle with, or what we hear from the community, is trying to get the community to understand the importance of having salaries that are competitive. We've even been told on numerous occasions our teachers make too much, and we know that's not the case. But how do you communicate to the public in terms of we have to be able to be in a position to be competitive financially so that we can retain the staff that we have?
That's a big piece of your work.
Yeah.
I'll let you take that one.
I think this is a good first step. I did not know until today that there's teacher poaching going on here.
Yes.
I didn't know that. And that just that mere knowledge tells us, well, we can't lose our teachers. We can't lose our good teachers. So just that bit of information tells this commission, well, we need to have a strategy that keeps good teachers in our system so that they're there for the long term. Rhonda.
To that, that's been going on for a long time, and I've always said that, you know, we're the farm team for the suburbs. And everybody knows it, and it's been that way for years, but teachers don't necessarily leave because Bexley pays, you know, $800 more in salaries. A lot has to do with the working conditions, the principal leadership. Yes, we had great people up here who talked about their wonderful principals, but that's not 100% of the case. Everybody wants a supportive principal, and that will be the #1 reason a teacher will leave the building is because of the principal, whether it's to the suburbs or whether it's to Nationwide Insurance. So that's key. The other thing is, you know, the work in urban districts is really hard work. And when you come here, you have to say, these are the children I want to teach, and I'm willing to make that kind of investment over time. So money does make a difference, but that is not why people leave.
You said, but back to the principal. Now, I go back to the principal, and I keep going back to that. You mentioned it again, that you think that some of the reason, I'm asking you the question, some of the reason why teachers leave to other districts is because of the principal. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit, please?
With the support of the principal in the building, I mean, it is key. Becky talked about her principal who was a mentor to her in the building and how she worked. It's about the relationships that the people have with the administrator. Jim Mahoney said, you know, if you don't feed the teachers, they eat the kids. And so, you know, we have to have supportive administrators who work with who know their subject matter, who support their teachers, who allow them to lead in the buildings and make decisions. You know, this is a hard profession where, you know, you go in, pretty much I had planned to do this. Day one, I went in being a teacher, and 35 years later, I leave being a teacher. I mean, what other profession do you go in that what you did year 1 is what you're going to do in year 35? You know, what kind of responsibilities are you giving for teachers while they're in those buildings that make them want to stay there? I mean, they have lots to offer, but that just may not happen.
I wish we could spend more time on that
We
issue
can talk later.
of principal. No, we need to talk now.
Oh, okay.
During the commission, this is why we're here.
Okay.
Because when I've raised the issue of principals and what their role is, and I'm learning this, I'm trying to understand it. And I keep hearing that our principal's great, and I'm hearing from you that sometimes that's not always the case.
No, it is
not. I'm trying to figure out what's going on here.
I'll be glad to give you some examples. I mean, I'm going to just get down to union. The section of the contract that's grieved most often is lack of administrative support and discipline. Teachers want to work in buildings where students know how to behave and that they get support from the principal. So that's a huge factor. And, you know, you have to also go back to what Elizabeth McNally said. Not all of the behaviors are just because, you know, we have teachers who don't want to be bothered with kids, but they come to our schools with a lot of issues. And they may need health care services, and they may need social services. But it's really tough in buildings, and if you look at some of our surveys, I'd be glad for you to look at that about what they value. Students know how to behave in this building. And if they don't, what is the principal and what are the teachers doing to solve that issue in the building? Because you could have a really tough school, same type of kid next door, and one school out of control and the other not. So you have to have that leadership in the building, and it doesn't always happen. We send you the best here, but that's not always. Every building has to be like the building where the teachers work who were talking to you today, and that is not the case, and that's why it's easy to leave if there is no support for the teacher in the building.
So what's your reaction to that?
I was going to say, can I sharpen it? Teacher has a choice: $500 raise to stay, or go to a building with a principal that they respect. What are they going to choose in your experience?
Go to the building with the principal that they respect. I think there's two parts of this too, Rhonda and Mayor. It's quality young teacher who doesn't receive the support. And it's not just principal support, it's whole system support for their growth, a mentor that's a teacher that helps them with their practice. It's always a shame for Columbus when that great upcoming teacher leaves and goes to Bexley for, and it may be more than $800, it might be $1,800 or $2,800 or $3,300 more, but it's even worse when they leave teaching altogether and they walk right out the door and they never come back. And that's where the data, when you disaggregate it and you look at the people who are leaving the profession, not just going to a suburban school district for perhaps a more supportive environment and a little bit more money.
Do we have any data?
Sure.
Do we have any data on teachers leaving our city to another city? I got my competitive,
You don't think it's a secret. We raised this when you were sitting here.
Yeah.
We'll gather what data
Sure.
it does
Yeah.
exist.
Be happy to.
$800, $1,800, whatever it is,
well,
versus a better principal, stronger principal.
Well, there was.
What would you choose?
I think the research is clear on leadership and the role that it plays in any organization. People don't leave mission statements. They'll only leave for money if it's a lifestyle change, typically, but they'll leave leaders. Okay, there was a compensation question in there somewhere, I think, and I think I've just one big thought. I hear pipeline questions is the question in the end, you're going to have efficacy in all of these areas. You're going to have to be able to find talent, grow talent, keep talent, and then inspect what you expect. Now, what that looks like, and we could spend hours on each individual component of this, but I would argue those are the buckets in which you're going to have to look across the organization and evaluate where you are, what are you doing well in some of those areas, and where do you have some challenges.
We got a few quick questions and quick answers. Tanny, then Pat, then Alex.
I was just...
And Chip, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Thank
Chip.
you.
Just talking to Rhonda, in our business, when we have people leave, we have exit interviews to try to find out, use data why. And I, talking to Rhonda, we don't have exit interviews of why our teachers, at least Columbus City Schools, are leaving. I was curious if you have data from other school systems of exit interviews of teachers of why they're leaving. So you must have some data.
There's a lot of national data out there that around that issue and why we're getting the churn in years 3 through 5, particularly in urban areas. And they're leadership working conditions types of challenges. And we oftentimes take our youngest developing teachers and put them in with some pretty challenging circumstances.
It'd be
That's something to
for
ponder.
Columbus to at least ask that question of their teachers.
Thank you. Pat?
Really,
It's out there. It's very much out there.
For
Sorry.
Mayor Coleman, I think this correlation that we've seen between the principals who have been here of high-performing schools and excellent teachers who are complementary of their principals, we see that correlation. But I would just say from the work of the library, we have examples where we hear of the lack of leadership in the school and the impact that it has on the teachers and their morale. I'd ask this group, or these two gentlemen, just one other quick question. Both Jim Mahoney and trying to think of who else talked about, Steve Dakin on our tour of the Reynoldsburg schools talked about the importance of focus. And we see with each commission meeting, we understand the complexity of all of the challenges that we're facing. But you two work with so many schools. If you were to begin to tell us what are the 2 or 3 areas that we ought to focus on to get meaningful results instead of 30 priorities, what advice would you give us?
You're in the schools every day.
Are you talking about in specific to human capital or in the grand array of school improvement?
Grand array.
Okay. I would focus on hiring. That's where I would start, and pipeline development. And then for my existing staff, I would focus on assessment literacy and the ability to use data to help kids and make mid-course corrections for kids.
And I would only add that similar to your conversations you're having on early childhood, the first 3 years of that teacher's lifespan, you have to hook them, you have to support them, you have to grow them exponentially in the first 3 years. It has to be a tremendous investment made.
Alex?
So I think Tony really flipped through our study of basically what I would call a strategic plan. A strategic plan for talent management. Almost any organization would have one. I'm sure the City of Columbus Public Schools has one, if in fact we've had a poaching problem for 2 decades, as has been suggested. So I'd be interested in hearing from our school district administration, school board. I'd love to review the strategic plan for human capital and the kinds of strategies they've been working over the last several years to deal with this critical problem, so that we can compare it and try to improve upon it as it relates to, thought leadership that we see here today.
We will absolutely ask that question. Chip Spinning.
I just had a lot of what we're talking about, I think, is really related to culture. We know how culture in an organization, a business, or whatever drives, and it's driven through leadership to a lot of extent. And I personally believe that, human capital, we all need professional development, but I guess I'm asking for an education because, I think there's a huge benefit in 360 evaluations. We saw the 4 quadrants earlier, from leadership on down through a school system. Is there ability or assessments out there that would, from a 360 perspective, evaluate that information and then use coaches? I don't know that coaches are used. That's part of my question. I don't know if coaches are used that much. Usually they're not in the public sector, but I think that they're a huge value to identify those targeted strategies to not only improve the professional development, but address the culture as well. And
so, Tony and Tom, last word from both of you in response to Chip.
I did flip through that very quickly. If you are interested in this in more depth, we have a free course. It's on our website, so go take it and enjoy. It's
And then we'll test you on it.
Yes.
Who do you provide it to?
The course?
Yeah.
Anybody who wants to look at it.
And are you engaged with the City of Columbus Public Schools on that topic?
On this topic?
Yes.
No, we're not.
Okay, thanks.
Tom?
To Chip's point, Columbus has had instructional coaches embedded in their buildings, tried some different approaches over time, but the instructional coaching piece or the teacher leader piece is a critical component, I think, to establishing the culture where it's lead teachers, expert teachers, the top pedagogical experts, and deep content knowledge experts working with teachers in a supportive environment.
I would agree. I think there's tremendous promise in career ladders for teachers.
So, Madam Chair, as I turn it back to you, we thank Tom and Tony for their contributions. And let me just point out that Tony is from Mattel for Kids, Tom from the ESC of Franklin County. Those two organizations, together with Kids Ohio, Mark Reel, and Ann and Erica, who are here, chair people, we would not be able to, members of the commission, we would not be able to do what we're doing without the help of those organizations. So please would everybody acknowledge Kids Ohio and the ESC.
Eric, you took the words from me. I was going to ask for our collective acknowledgement of all of these wonderful presenters. As we have done in the past 4 meetings, I would ask you to, can you hear me? I would ask you to support the request that we have the staff of the commission compile what we've heard today and present that to us at its reasonable opportunity. And with that said, I would entertain, no, sweetie. I was going to motion for adjournment, but no, I will wait for you.
Okay, I wanted to say something. Today I probably was the first day I was a little bit frustrated with the panel discussion because I felt like, did we really answer the question? How do we recruit and retain the best teachers and principals? I know I can go take the course, but I mean with the teachers, they're all great, and of course their input was valuable. It was absolutely, I mean, invaluable. It was, but I feel like there was not enough discussion. I feel like I didn't get the answer to how does current practices support or undermine this goal. So I just want to make sure that we have time for those discussions so that when I leave, I can have those answers and feel comfortable with that. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. And again, my apologies. I should, before I solicit the motion for adjournment, I should ask if there's anyone else that has any comments or questions, and I will turn it over. I understand from Judge Marbley, he does have a question.
Actually, our school board president, Ms. Perkins, was kind enough to provide to us, and I'm going to have these distributed before you leave, an invitation. There's a focus group that is scheduled to meet on Tuesday, February 12th at noon, relating to the Columbus City School Superintendent search. And certainly on behalf of the commission, we will welcome the opportunity. Our only dilemma is that since it hadn't been previously an agenda item, we don't know that this time works best for the commission members. And so what we will likely do is work with you at a time after we get a chance to kind of canvass our commission members, work with you on a time that would be most convenient. And before I turn it back over to my co-chair, the one thing I did want to say to you, Ms. Augustine, is that oftentimes it may not be the answer that we find, but the discussion that we have that will prompt us to think more about the solutions to these very intractable problems, because these are problems that have existed for SCORE. And we probably will not divine an answer within a 2 or 3 hour time block. But the fact that you have some frustration is what it reminds me of what one of my professors told me when I was about to graduate from college, and I had that same conversation with him. He said, the fact that you recognize what you don't know means that we've done our job. So the fact that you recognize what the problem is and what we have to think about and how we have to go about thinking about it may be the first indication that we are gaining traction.
So, what I'm saying is we haven't done that yet.
I just want to say he may not be able to dance, but, but he knows how to make a point. Okay. May I have a motion for adjournment? Okay, all those in favor? Okay.